Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video in my Introduction to Chess series. In this video we're going to meet the knight. So the knight is a really cool chess piece. It's by far the trickiest piece. It's the only chess man that moves in a somewhat non-linear fashion. So there are several ways to describe the knight's movement. One is that the knight moves in an L shape, which could be two squares in one direction and one square in another, two squares in one direction and one square in another. Or one square in one direction and two squares in another. A single square in one direction and then two squares in an orthogonal or perpendicular direction from the direction you moved the first time. So it's kind of a compound move. You could also describe the knight's movement as moving to the second closest squares of the opposite color from the square on which he currently stands. So this black knight is resting on a light square, so it's going to move to a dark square. These four are the closest dark squares. He's going to move to the second closest dark squares, which are these 8. Finally, you could describe the knight's movement as moving to the closest squares that are different, that lie on a different line from the rank, file, or diagonal that contains the square on which he currently stands. So this knight's standing on this light square, and that square is a part of these ranks, files, and diagonals. So the knight's going to move to the closest squares that aren't on any of those lines, and that is again these 8 squares. So this knight can move to any of these 8 white squares. And when he moves, there's a new set of squares that he moves to. Notice that the knight always moves to a square of the opposite color from the one on which he stands. So if the knight's on a light square, he's only going to be able to move to dark squares on the next turn. The following turn, he's only going to be able to move back to light squares. The knight can capture any enemy piece that stands on a square that he could move to. So this knight can capture any of these 4 pieces. And a knight cannot move to or land on squares occupied by his allies. So that knight can't move to any of these 4 squares, but it could capture any of these 4 white pieces. Another very important property of knights is that knights can jump over and leap over other chessmen. This is something no other chess piece can do. So this knight's not impeded at all, not hindered at all in its movement by these 8 pawns. A bishop on this square would be pretty impeded. It could capture those 4 pawns, but otherwise couldn't move at all. This knight can move just as easily as the one we looked at that was on an empty board. This knight can still hop to any of these 8 squares. A knight's movement is best thought of as point to point. So I like to even sort of mimic that when I physically move the chess pieces around the board. The other chess pieces, they kind of slide along the surface of the chessboard. But the knight, you can physically pick him up and hop him around, like you're beaming someone in Star Trek or disapparating and apparating in Harry Potter. He moves from one square and he lands on another one. That's sort of how he captures too. He kind of squashes an enemy piece that he captures. And that's also useful to think about that when you're thinking about capturing. This knight, you might think he kind of crosses these 2 squares, one of them or both of them somehow when he takes that pawn, or even maybe goes to these squares, but the knight really doesn't go to any of these squares when it captures this pawn. It just moves from this square and lands on that one. So the knight's powers of leaping and jumping over other pieces only adds to its trickiness. So the knight's a great piece. You start the game with 2 of them.